Hey everybody, John Brown here again, and for my third board game review, decided to do a little bit of an older game. For my first two reviews, I did a game that was either brand new or had a new expansion coming out, but for this game I decided to do a game that may be a little bit difficult to find. I did check, you can find it on eBay right now for reasonable prices, but as far as I know, it is out of print. But if it's something that interests you, maybe it's something you want to pick up while you still can get it at an affordable price. So today we'll be looking at a game called Tribune. Tribune has kind of some worker placement elements. I don't really want to call it drafting, but you're trying to get certain cards in your hand. But it's more of a hand management game themed around the Roman Empire. So it's a game that I enjoy quite a bit, but doesn't have a lot of buzz. I was going through some of the games that I have, I thought about doing a video for, and this is a game that doesn't have a lot of videos for it, and maybe it's because it came out before there was a lot of video reviewers, so I decided to give it a little bit of love and do a video for it today. So let's check out how it plays. Alright, here we can see the board laid out. There we have the box cover, a quick start guide that basically, after you understand the rules of the game, gives you a reference of the things you're going to need the most, something that every game should have. A pretty well written rulebook. Decent storage in the box, and there's playmats. Right here I have two laid out. You can play 2 to 5 players. I've never played it with 2. I've played it with all the other numbers. I think it plays pretty well with each type. The cards that we'll be choosing, the board. There are several different chits and whatever that you'll get depending on the victory conditions you're trying to meet. Money, of course. But one of the things that I want to point out is here's the deck of cards we're going to be drawing from and placing out on the board and trying to get into our hands. But these are all different, this very big stack of cards, all different cards that are either player aids or different victory conditions you can play for different numbers of people. And you can choose to play either a quick game, a medium-length game, or a long game depending on the number of victory conditions. And it also scales depending on the number of players. What do we have going on the board here? Well, up top we have all these different areas of influence in Rome that we're going to be trying to take control of. And we're going to have a hand, and our hand size is going to vary during the game, of a certain number of cards. So let's say this is our hand right now. So this is actually a really good hand, in the sense that right here, what we're going to want to do during the game is get sets of certain types of cards. So here we have a pretty good group. In order to take over a faction, you need at least 2 cards of that type. And then we'll have a starting hand, and then, of course, our hands will change each round. But I might be going after more of the cards I have if I want to take over those factions during the game. So, during the game, basically, we're going to be placing our, I'm not sure what they're called in this game, agents, meeples, workers, whatever, in different spaces on the board. Basically, up here, this is going to cost us 1 gold to get that card. And then in turn order, we'll go around, each of us placing meeples. Any of these will cost us 3 to get. But, and actually, interestingly enough, the forum, the auction, basically, the catacombs, all these things are described thematically in the book, what they were in ancient Rome, and kind of trying to tie it into how the different systems in the game work. It's a card game, it's not necessarily the most thematic game, but I did find it interesting that they really did make an effort to explain why things are they are and why they work the way they do in the game. Something a lot of board games miss. They just either assume you'll get why it works thematically, or I'm not quite sure. See, this is an interesting place. If we go here, we flip over the card, and then the player can choose. They can either pay 5 denarii or whatever it is to buy that card, or get rid of the card and get paid 5 instead. So that's an interesting spot, but you don't know what that card is going to be. Here, without cards until we have a certain value of cards, or if we get a leader out, and then you can go there and discard a card. So here you could discard 1 card to get 3 cards. That's a pretty good value, if those are cards you want. Here, the first player to go here will flip over 2, and you can choose any 2. Oh, and here we have a leader card. And leaders are interesting because when you take over a faction, they don't count as any power when taking over a faction. They do count as a card, but they give you a special bonus when you take over a faction. If another player were to go here, then we'd flip over all 3. At the end of the round, when all of these things are resolved on the board, basically there would be a bid between those two players. Basically you put however much you want to bid in your hand, and you flip it over simultaneously. When then, after you bid, whoever the winner is pays the loser whatever the winning amount of gold was. So you can go there and not bid anything and potentially get gold if that's the case. If only one person goes there, only 2 cards will be flipped over, and then they just have to pay 1 at the bank to get it. Up here in the Catacombs, you can choose. You don't have to go in any one of these spots first. If I were to go here, then when this resolved, I would get to look at all these cards and pay 4 right into here, and then there are ways for people to get the money out of here at some point during the game, and choose one of these cards. If I just wanted to get one of them, I could go to the 2, but I would pick last if anyone else went to the 4 or 3. So you can go there just hoping you can get a card that you need. You can pay a lot to go first. You can go in the middle, hope no one else goes there. Here, at the Pantheon, whoever goes here, they have to have, sorry about the flare there, but on their board, a Vestal Virgin faction tile. In order to get one, they can take it over. There are certain ways to get tiles in the game other than taking over a faction. Once you get one of these tiles, you don't lose it. So even if you no longer control that faction, you'll still have it. But if you have it, you can come here and peek at what this card is. And then in order to get the favor of the gods, basically, which is one of the win conditions, and can be represented, you can have a temporary, or if it's purple, a permanent favor of the gods. In order to get that, you have to discard a card of that color. So, you can go there early and see what it is. If you already have that color, great. If you don't, then you can try to get that color somewhere from the board. Let's see here, there's the Field of Mars down here, where any players that go here discard a pair of cards, and if they discard the highest pair, they get 2 laurels instead of 1. Up here is a spot as many players can go to as they want. The first player to go here will just get 7 money. Every other player, even if the same player goes here again, will get 5 more. And money is often one of the victory conditions, so sometimes there's a mad rush for this spot at the end of the game if that's the only victory condition someone is winning, or doesn't have to win. And then up here is where we would actually place someone to say, I want to take over this faction. Another player can go to the same spot and try to take it over as well, but if you're the first player, you'll have a slight advantage. So how do you take over a faction? Well, as long as you have 2 cards, you can get that faction, and then you will get whatever bonus this card says. So here, you'll get 1 legion, and legion is usually, a certain number of legions is usually one of the victory conditions. If you have a leader, you'll get a special bonus, like this one, for example, says you can get, well, it's hard to read, a faction marker of your choice. So here's a way you can get a faction marker you don't have without taking over the faction if you use that guy. Now, if you're taking over someone else's faction, you're probably going to need either more than 2 cards or more than 2 power. So, for example, if someone currently owned the Vestal Virgins faction and they had the leader and a 7, well, they have 7 power right now, and there's 2 ways you can beat them. You can have more cards than them or a higher total value. So, for example, if I played a 1, 2, and a 3, I would only have 6 power. However, because I have 3 cards to their 2, I would still take over the faction. So factions are going to change hands a lot during the game. Now down here, I have not only more cards, but more power, so that would put me in a more defensible position if I could take over a faction with all those things. So we'll get the power for the faction for taking it over when we do, and then at the end of the round, we'll come over here to our boards, and these are pretty intimidating the first time that you play all these different things, but basically they tell us what we get each round if we still control that faction. Now we keep the marker, but we have to be currently controlling the faction to get the bonus. Then over here is a summary of what all the different spaces on the board do. So, as victory conditions, we might have, for example, a Tribune, which is the other side of the scroll. The Tribune is one of the most complicated things in the game. You need to control one faction, then get another faction, things like that. A favor of the gods is often a victory condition, a certain number of legions, a certain number of laurels, a certain number of money, or a certain number of these at some point having the faction control marker. Those are, in general, the victory conditions. Some of them are obligatory that you have to control them, but in general, that's how the game works. At the end of each round, also, there's an auction for the Chariot. The Chariot can basically block off a faction and say, no one can take over this faction this round, which can be very important, especially when you're going after that tricky Tribune. Alright, Tribune is a little bit tricky when you first get into it. Seems like there's a lot of things going on. Understanding how to get that Tribune is a little bit tricky. But after you play a round or two, it's a really simple game. You're just collecting the cards you want, trying to take over the factions, and trying to get to a certain number of victory conditions. It's not that deep of a game, but it's pretty fun. It plays relatively quickly, and that's the other great thing is if you want a little bit of a longer game, choose a longer game. Choose a higher number of victory conditions. That's one of my biggest positives about the game is you can decide, how long you want it to be. Basically, games are usually pretty tight. Once you play it a little bit, you'll get a better idea of what you're doing, but it's not that hard of a concept to grasp. So, it's a medium weight game. It's a little bit trickier than, gateway entry level game, but it's certainly not that deep. So, if that sort of thing, hand management, set collection, and an element of worker placement, and a nice, medium level interests you, this is a really fun game. If you want something really crunchy and strategic, this isn't going to do it for you. Alright, potential negatives of the game. The cards are oddly shaped. If you're someone who feels the need to sleeve your cards, you'll have to find just right sleeves. If you're into really, thinky strategy games, this isn't your type of thing, but honestly, there's not much that I would say negative about the game. This game didn't blow me away. It's not one of my favorite games of all time, but it's just simply an enjoyable game. For positives, relatively light, variable length of time. Once you understand what everything does, really easy to pick up and play. And if it's the sort of thing that might interest you, I would suggest picking it up before it becomes really difficult and expensive to pick up. So I just wanted to give a little love to a game that maybe hasn't gotten a lot of love and is a little bit older, but it's still something you can actually get if it's something you might be interested in. Overall, I'd probably give the game, for me, maybe a B minus, and that's really a very positive grade. It's just, I don't think there's enough there to say I love it, but every time I've played it, it's been an enjoyable game, which is why I wanted to do a review. Alright, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you guys later.